All right. So, welcome
Awesome.
back. We are going to look at AI, and we've been looking at it here and there, but it looks like we're going to take a deeper dive. AI, peace building, and humanitarian careers. So, I am pleased to have with us Maureen Irani Pierogi. She's a problem solver in chief. I like that. Bridge builder. She's an academic. And she's the principal consultant and founder of FOMIC Global Consulting. She also teaches at Kennesaw State University in Georgia. So I'm glad that you're here. And she's with Kathy Odera, who is a specialist in higher education, global engagement, gender integration, works with adolescent girls. And you were at USAID, right, Kathy, for a while? Okay. And
Yes,
you
I was.
you have are you working on your PhD or have your PhD from Kennesaw?
I I I have my PhD already.
Okay, great, great. From Kennesaw. So I've had a lot of connections with Kennesaw State over the years, mostly through Cheryl Hayes. If you ever cross base
Yes,
with Cheryl, he's a friend from way back in the day. So I used to work with the Forage Center about, 10, 15 years ago. So,
Beautiful.
I'm going to turn it over to you. Thank you, ladies, for being here. And I will step in the background and then I'll come back in about 45 minutes or so. But the time is yours. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, David. Really appreciate the warm welcome and the warm introduction rather. All right, so I will start by saying good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on what part of the world that you are currently in. It's such an honor, really, to be here, to share a conversation or two about what we're very passionate about, which is peace building, humanitarian, in the humanitarian space, and of course, the new disruptor, which is artificial intelligence. And most importantly, how is this field shaping your career, and or how are you going to shape this field? So, let me pause and switch over to my colleague, Catherine Odera, and we're going to share a bit about who we are, what we have done, etc.
thank you, Maureen. As Maureen has said, good day, everyone, because we are joining from a truly global village. We are all over the world, put together by our goals to talk about peace building and humanitarian fields. And one of the things that I would like to talk about is to introduce myself and also position myself. Right now, I am currently in Nairobi, Kenya, but I have been based in Washington, D.C. for the last few years, working with USAID, working in higher education, and sort of seeing how these different worlds collide into looking at humanitarianism and international development from multiple layered aspects. And so I've also had the privilege of working within communities, grassroots level communities. So as we're talking about this, you're going to see how the local is truly global. And as we are framing it from the AI perspective, are we also taking into account those local contexts? So just like a movie trailer, welcome. There's a lot more to come.
Thanks for that, Catherine. Really appreciate it. So, I'm on the other hand, I am Maureen Erinek Barogi, and funny enough, I have known Kathy for quite some time now. We were both colleagues when we walked across the stage 10 years ago when we got our doctoral degrees, and we have worked prior to that extensively and also since then. So she's such a wonderful collaborator and very passionate in the field. So let me take the bit, let's take us a bit on a personal note. How I found myself in this field, I grew up across, in North America and in West Africa. And, spending my formative years and adult years in both parts of the world gave me a unique perspective from a very young age on on the global forces, the structures, and our responsibility in it and what we can and should contribute. And so that, in a lot of ways, informed my academic pursuits. It also informed my career pursuits. My experience spans multiple sectors from the US government, working, being affiliated with Department of Defense, now war, higher education, being in a classroom, teaching and researching, And of course, being in the nonprofit space and philanthropic space, where actual programming is done. And so connecting policy research in academia and actual programming in nonprofit gives you positions, or I would say has positioned me in a quite a unique way to see various things play out. And so, and I think, this is sort of what anchors this topic to get today, where our paths have not been linear in this field. Knowledge, of course, is important. Passion is important. Strong conviction is extremely important. And so I hope that, once you leave this talk or this session with us today, you take something with you. It doesn't have to be a lot, just something that you can that could hopefully impact your career and or your personal life. So let me start with a story. And this story is about a very good friend of mine, another friend and colleague of mine, who in 2019, she was deployed after a major flood. She coordinated volunteers, she managed distribution lists, she worked directly with affected communities. This was in 2019, and this was her role. Fast forward 2023, she was asked to help pilot an AI-assisted crisis mapping tool. And this tool used satellite imagery. And, this imagery sort of was used to prioritize neighborhoods that were really most affected and where needs were the highest. And then by 2025, she wasn't managing supply chains anymore. She was advising leadership on ethical data governance, and she was reviewing algorithms bias and community consent framework. And I think this is important to understand. And having discussed, we are always in conversations with each other, is that her role or our role in this field, in this sector, did not disappear. It simply evolved. And the question for us today is this: are we preparing ourselves for that evolution? What skill set, what tools do we have, or are we acquiring to ensure that we are ready for the future? And of course, with AI being this great disruptor. So we thought we are gonna do a poll today, but it's okay. We're gonna utilize the chat feature. So I want to get your perspective, sort of like a temperature check on your view of artificial intelligence. How do you feel about it in the peace building and humanitarian space that we're in? Are you excited? Are you curious? Are you concerned? Or are you already using it? I'm going to pause and I want to see what some of your responses are.
I see curious.
Okay.
It's a great
Active,
enabling tool. Yep.
actively exploring and using, already using it with concern, hesitancy, and a lot of monitoring. So that leans more on the cautious, and well, cautious, actively using it. That's a merge, a little mixture there. Okay, as more responses trickle in, well, I usually see when I ask this question a mixture of both excitement and caution, and kind of that's what resonates with some of these responses here today. And I would say that's healthy. It's healthy because the future of this field does require both innovation and restraint, right? Restraint in the sense that we are dealing with vulnerable populations, we're dealing with people in crisis settings that need our help the most. And when we move rapidly, right, we may not be putting their best interest in the forefront. And so these are some, I tend to ask this question, sort of gauge where we are. Because it's here. Artificial intelligence, it's here. It's being used. It's making decisions as we speak. But we help frame, if we are in those decision-making rooms and those spaces, we do help with the put in some ethical guardrails. So what are some forces that are shaping the field? Well, um, we do know that AI is not happening in isolation, right? Um, and it intersecting in some of these forces is real. We do see geopolitical fragmentation. There is increasing instability and competing global structures that we see currently. Um, we do see climate-driven crisis. There is displacement. There is resource scarcity. There's repeated disaster, and they are more intense in nature. We also see rapid artificial intelligence advances. That's another force. We see increased use of automation, predictive systems. We have that as well, where we have early warning systems. And of course, we have data analytics. And the fourth part is localization and accountability. Communities now are demanding leadership and not extraction. So in the past, we do know how this field has evolved. So now there is accountability, not from who we're getting the funds from, but who we are actually connecting with, and those that we are partnering with on the ground. And so these are some forces that are shaping the field. And as we think strategically about our careers, about opportunities, it's important that we put these forces in mind because they are shaping how we navigate this very complex field. So where is AI already in use? AI we see is already in use in early warning systems. It's used in satellite assessments after disasters. Is used in conflict prediction models where we can sort of see where outbreak is going to occur or where conflict is going to occur and maybe get ahead of it before it does. We do see it in again, satellite damage assessment after a disaster happens, we're able to use or utilize satellite imagery to sort of conduct some sort of assessment on the area that is most impacted, where the needs are, etc. Then, of course, we see it in humanitarian need analysis. And actually, we can go as far as AI being used by those that are most affected. For example, we are seeing that in some places in Afghanistan and Ukraine, where those that are fleeing conflict or disaster, they are actually using artificial intelligence to determine where is the closest distribution center, what are some there's legal advice or some legal questions that they have for those who are migrating from one disaster or fleeing from one disaster, and trying to go somewhere safe. So you do find that it's not just about those that are making the decisions, but those that are actually impacted the most are actually also using artificial intelligence. And we have to make sure that they are not further being vulnerable, right, or being impacted negatively. So here is a sort of like in this field as well, there's always some ethical crossroads that we have to sort of navigate, right? And for this particular one, it is more so, an AI tool. It's deployed already. It's been approved, it's deployed, and it ranks households for emergency aid distribution due to missing documentation and undocumented families are systematically excluded, right? Even in the highest need areas. How would you respond? For some reasons, like I'm seeing everybody, which is great, but it's covering some parts of my presentation, my screen. So how would you respond, right? Do you deploy it because it's efficient? Do you pause it for audit? Or do you reject it entirely? I kind of want to see where people stand in this ethical crossroads of a scenario. We're going to use the chat feature, by the way. Pause for audit. Kathy, what do you see?
I see pause for audit, rejected, and request further study. Pause for audit, another pause for audit to ensure you don't increase the conflict. Please keep the responses coming.
Thanks for that. So we do see various responses. We do see though that we're being cautious, right? We want to ensure that we are no longer or we are not inflicting more harm, more damage on those that are the vulnerable. And so this is where your ethical framework comes into play. And this is where it becomes, I would say, a career advantage as well. We do know that technology increases speed. That's the efficiency component. But ethics ensures justice, and we always have to keep that in mind.
And I'm going to go ahead and speak on this as well. And feel free to put things in the chat as we continue. This is it's supposed to be very interactive within this very creative virtual spaces that the Forage Center has sort of weaved us all together. When we're talking about artificial intelligence systems, thinking about the aspects or the different contexts within which we work in, we cannot have these conversations without putting it on a backdrop of power and positionality. The reason I like working with Maureen is when Maureen speaks, she's very deliberate, and then when I speak like the Kenyan, where we are running marathons and I really, really rap. So I'm really sorry if it's going to be really fast. I'm happy to slow down. But when we're looking at power and positionality, we have to think about it from the context of who designed the tool, for example. If you think about the different AI platforms, and when we're talking about AI platforms, we are not purporting that there's only one that they each work separately. Some of them are intertwined. Some of them are put as this umbrella tool. And so we sort of talk about the ethics of that and some of the things that you've already written about, audit, pause. We don't want to escalate the conflict. So the question that we ask also is who designed the tool? Who were those designers? Who were in the room or proverbial rooms that actually designed these? And so when we think about it, where we are also saying, were these designed in your really traditional, when you say AI tool, what's the first thing that usually comes to mind? Someone will say Silicon Valley. Silicon Valley is a place, but it's not necessarily the place that may be connected to the fields, like I talked about in terms of grassroots level. And then when we are talking about who designed it, whose worldview is shaping that logic? Are we basing it from the global north? Are we basing it from a Eurocentric perspective? And are we also saying that, wait a minute, the community needs some input? And if they're coming in with input, is the language that we are speaking or the AI tools that speak and those language very context driven? So those are some of the questions. And when we look at it from that aspect of who designed the tool, we also have to talk about who controls that data. Let's look at it from the perspective of data power and digital inequity. So the question is, and I'm usually known for speaking about decolonization and colonization. Stick with me for a moment. I'm talking about it from those aspects of power structures and systems that drive, say, the international development fields, humanitarianism. Think of words such as beneficiary. Think of words such as donors. That language in itself sort of goes ahead and cements this aspect of colonization. So, for example, Maureen has mentioned it, is data, when data is collected in some of these communities, are we extracting, or is it data that is designed or research that is designed by the people for the people themselves? And also, what is that digital divide? Do we have digital literacy? When somebody says that, oh, we did this mapping, and our AI tools told us that the closest water source is 5 kilometers away. But when you think about a community where there are women and girls that may be in danger of gender-based violence, that 5 kilometers that the machine or the AI said mapped it, but what does it mean in the lives of the women and girls who normally in some of these communities are the ones that are charged with getting that water? So what does it look like from a safeguarding perspective? So within that sentence, I'm just saying that we cannot look at AI tools on their own. We have to think about who are the most affected, who are the most vulnerable, and are they in those rooms that are creating these? And then we talked about data is power. Think about it. When we are trying to get funding, when we're trying to show we have M&E tools, don't people say, what are the numbers showing us? But the question is, are we also making sure that the data is also speaking within those local contexts? How do they collect data? What are their realities? Are we engaging indigenous ways or local ways of collecting data? That could also include storytelling and not necessarily the written perspectives. And then that part of, we said, do no harm. Do we inadvertently, in the design area, when we're talking about pausing for audit or requesting that people are engaged, are we making sure that we are not doing harm? So, for example, if at all I map an area that is full of very vulnerable communities and we publish this, who has access to that data? And have we inadvertently put these communities, whether or not it's within their intersectional identities, whether or not it's LGBTQI populations, whether or not it's people with disabilities, migrant communities, have we put them in harm by also identifying geopolitically and mapping where they are? We have to ask those questions. And if data has power, which conflicts and humanitarian issues and contexts are being highlighted over others using AI biases? A big example, and I think Janet Mugo, you spoke about this in one of your sessions. You talked about what we see in the news being Gaza, Ukraine, Iran, but you said, please don't forget that there's a big humanitarian crisis that's happening in Sudan. And why isn't this being put out there as something needing solutions that is within the ecosystem? And so again, those are the places when we're talking about power and positionality. When we're looking at AI tools, we cannot look at it on its own without looking at if you think about a bicycle, what are those spokes that come from the wheel? All of these are connected, and we cannot remove those aspects of the connectivity and the people themselves. And also thinking about who's being harmed in terms of who is invisible, who is misrepresented in training the data. What are those biases in inclusion and exclusions? Are we actually speaking the language where AI tools do they create harm in addition to making sure that we are able to do some of this work? We've heard about technology facilitated gender-based violence. And we saw a lot of that during COVID. We saw a lot of that where the people who are bullying or the disinformation, they don't have to come to you in the living room. Everything now is done within these different aspects. So the question is, who is responsible when AI systems cause harm? And do we have those regulatory or universal regulatory systems that can hold people accountable? Again, some of these are rhetorical questions because some of these are still emerging areas. Maureen, next slide, please.
Thanks for that, Catherine. I think it does help center us as we think about the pathways into this field. For those who are trying to venture into this field, it is rewarding, okay? It has its rewarding sides, just like any other profession. There are occupational hazards. And I will say personally, it's emotional more so than the physical component of it. So in this field, there are really four intersections that you can sort of look at when you are trying to branch your way in the humanitarian and peace building space. We have the systems influence. We have the community engagement components. We have the local implementation piece, and we have the technical expertise. I cannot underscore that enough, how technical expertise is extremely crucial in the field that we operate. At the systems level or systems influence, we're looking at policy, we're looking at diplomatic engagement, we're looking at strategy, right? And we compare that also with the academic component where that's driven by evidence, teaching, research, and there are a lot of hubs now in a lot of academic institutions that are social science driven, that are very interdisciplinary. That is the key, right? Because in this field, having interdisciplinary expertise is extremely valuable because we don't want a situation where people are working in silos or a certain field or a certain um, um, school of thought dominates the decisions and the conversations. We're also looking at in the community engagement piece where you have the nonprofit and the philanthropic space where directly work on program delivery on those that are impacted the most. And of course, we have the technical piece where, technology, innovation, tools, platform, and having subject matter expertise as well. So, and there are a mixture of both, right? Where you can be in a space that has maybe have two, three, you're very lucky if you experience all four, but it's not impossible. And that is why, I said earlier that this path, you could have a path that is non-linear. Some people are very linear, they start from the top, bottom, and go all the way to the top. It's okay. But it's okay to also have a non-linear career path in this field as well.
So speaking of which, when we think, how many times have we had the word pivot in the last year? And when the world was thrown, I'll say the world of humanitarianism and peace building and international development was thrown into a disarray. And I'm one of those people who works at USAID and based on what Maureen just shared in the previous slide, had those intersecting aspects of my career, whether or not it's academia, education, grassroots level, community building, and then coming from a funder perspective as well. And so when we're thinking about career pivot points, especially for advanced professionals mid-career, and then maybe also this could be something where it's a bird's eye view for those who may be starting or trying to morph into some of these multifaceted careers. So when we think about, we may think about it like, oh, now I have to start afresh and all these different things. However, we may not need to switch sectors. And hang there with me for a bit. I know you're probably like, say what? But for real. Because some of us have felt that we have to go back to the drawing board, not taking into account that we do have very deep technical and foundational multifaceted experience. So the question then it's not about learning AI. It's about how do we reposition or reposition our influence, credibility, and leadership in our field in all its multiplicity, where technology, ethics, and power collide into this one ethical and responsible use of our different areas. So looking at it, especially for the mid and senior level professionals, the most viable pivots built on what we already do. So, but it deepens our role in that governance, risk, and systems leadership. So leadership. So with the examples of where AI, I know somebody in the chat talked about what their role had been in these distribution centers. So how does AI then make that into something that is fluid, but also takes into account human rights, takes account into the context, and making sure that we are creating those enabling environments free from violence as well. And then another piece. So another example of that would be instead of program leader that we were, or program manager, maybe we could be digital safeguarding and risk directors, right? And so if we also look at it from the perspective of AI governance or cross-sectoral engagement and expertise, we could look at it, how do we work outside those silos? USAID was at that moment where we were thinking, if we're talking about gender equity and women's empowerment, we cannot do it from a silo. We have to look at it cross-sectorally. How does this interact with education, health, governance, and rights? So how do we make sure that we are having those different conversations? So AI governance and committees, how do we shape those institutional policies on responsible technology use when somebody is like, oh, we are from Anthropic, let's push this out. Let's push this out before ChatGPT or anybody does. But is anyone going back and saying that we have to think about the ethical implications And then how do we make sure that we are keeping the communities at the level as well? So how do you serve at the ethical advisory committees? Some of it is by invitation. Some of it is actually building your own table at some of those boards and saying that I have this expertise. I would like to sit down within this board, and these are the reasons why I would be a great contributor. So, for example, how do you align my example from my perspective, in my experience? How do I align AI use with gender equality, protection, and inclusion goals when we are thinking of, say, going into a humanitarian crisis? When you talk about heads of households, are you thinking that probably the way that in patriarchal communities, how heads of households are defined may not really work in displaced populations, because you do have women more often than not that are now playing the role of heads of households? And then the part of adaptive system leadership. How do you produce, how do you shape global norms and advocacy agendas when there is not one way of looking to make sure that many of these AI platforms are actually being regulated? What does regulation look like, for example? Can you do it from a research policy to responsible AI and human rights specialists? You see what I did? That I sort of rewarded what could have been one of our technical roles and sort of switched it, where we said responsible AI and human rights specialist. What does that look like? And then the last piece would be the field in all its multiplicity needs bridge builders more than pure technologists. How many times have we looked at jobs and we've seen AI and then we quickly switch to the next thing? So how do we move from development leadership to tech policy bridge role? This is a big one. How do we translate development and humanitarian realities to tech teams that may not have that same language that we have? And then how are we also recipients of their language, and how do we work together? And then that piece also of building those bridges across sectors will really help as we're starting to build upon the previous presentation. Before this was talking about who are we, what do we want to do, and then how do we now pivot based on what we're talking about today with infusing AI into what we already do. So and so, Dave, I just wanted to let you know that I hope that everyone can see that all these sessions are weaved together and they're not separate. They're actually speaking to similar things. So I just wanted to say that as well.
Thanks for that. Really, that's quite helpful in sort of helping folks kind of see how they can create positions with their own technical expertise in very new areas. So this is what I want to talk about, burnout and digital pressure. It is real. I would say I experienced it maybe some not too long ago, maybe, and I'm still recovering from it. But we do live in an age where we have 24/7 crisis cycles, right? There's always something going on. The boundaries between work and, our personal lives are blurred. It's causing chronic stress. There's data overload, right? And data essentially never sleeps, right? Crisis dashboards are constantly running. And we get to a point where we no longer, or we will get to a point if we're not careful, where we no longer have a space to learn and reflect. And this is what is heavily needed in our field of peace building and humanitarian intervention. You got to learn and you have to reflect. And so as you think about your role or your potential role or pivoting to a new role, how can you create a space to learn and reflect? Because if you do not learn and reflect, those that we are hoping to positively impact at some point, we will cause some harm. In our field, we always say, do no harm. That is the premise in how we operate. Do no harm. Make sure that you have crossed your T's and dotted your I's, right? So that you can protect those that are most vulnerable. So we always have to keep that at the back of our mind. And what boundaries protect your impact, right? Because long-term peace building requires stamina, not speed. Kathy, we have about I'll say good 10 more minutes.
Yes. So I'll go to this as well. So when you think about what Maureen just said, that it requires stamina and not speed. I would also like as teachers, also like using analogies that if you're thinking of a marathon, and you go with a 400 meters dash from the very beginning, chances are you're going to tire and have to drop out. I know as Kenyans, we don't know what that means because we are always running for 2.5 hours. And 2.5 hours is almost like a flight from here to New York. So when we are thinking about the skill sets for the future, how do we come in? And at the end of it, I'm going to ask you to think about which of these skill sets sort of seem more useful, what you want to learn more about, and which ones don't seem useful. So we've heard about in our fields about systems thinking. It is not enough anymore to think within those silos. So how do we move beyond those silos of programming and think about it in aspects of all interconnectedness? So for example, if you think about climate shocks, how does that impact displacement, economic stress, and risk, and in addition to risk? How do we understand how digital systems intersect with some of these protection and access and exclusion? So when you're thinking about it, can you say that you have this skill where you're able to think strategically from a systems thinking perspective? And then we can think about AI digital literacy. What does it mean when we are talking about having that literacy? How does technology shape or impact humanitarian response and peace building? You've heard about early warning systems, especially, for example, in Kenya, every 5 years, there's elections. And what goes with that sometimes is post-election violence. So can we then think about it and say that if we're going to use early system warnings, we are also making sure that we're going to safeguard those communities that may be affected so that they do not fall as victims of state or non-state actors. So what does your AI and digital literacy look like? And what can it look like in the future? Another piece is what we call cross-cultural leadership. We talked about power. Do we have that intercultural literacy added onto our repertoire of skills, whether or not it's technical skills, whether or not it's skills that we are acquiring? Can we navigate seamlessly within those power dynamics by also recognizing our privilege as professionals as we go into these communities? And then we also spoke about how do we make sure that within that intercultural leadership or cross-cultural leadership, we are ensuring that the communities with the most knowledge that are most affected are also being brought in at the table to design and plan and evaluate as equal partners and not necessarily as what we call quote unquote beneficiaries. We talked about ethical reasoning. Are we looking at are we sitting on these boards? Are we speaking up when we say we need to pause this? We need to pause the utilization of this AI platform or tool because right now we cannot guarantee that there are not going to be systems where the state is acting as an adversary to the people themselves based on different political issues that has led to displacement. What does data literacy mean? Can we translate it into aspects and languages that are understood by the communities themselves? How do we communicate? Are we extracting and not coming back to the community and saying, based on your feedback, this is what we saw? Then how do we come up with solutions based on what you're seeing? And the last piece, if I can really stress on this, is we have to be able to translate the technical pieces into human context and realities. If an IA output has thrown together a graph and we go into a community and we say, this is what we are going to do to you, that is doing harm already. Are we able to say that are we able to translate it where the communities themselves, as well as the stakeholders and those who maybe have power of funding and resource building, are we speaking to some of these stakeholders in languages they understand? And do we also understand it? Or are we falling into these traps of speaking above everybody else and we end up chasing our tails and not getting anything done? Next slide, please. So this is very simple. Very simple. Simply said, these are doable things. I usually feel that the weight of the world is on our shoulders. But when it's broken down as to what we can do within our spheres of influence, then why don't we break it down to five simple actions? And please, as we were looking at some of those skills that we talked about, feel free to say which ones did not work for you, whether or not, which one are you trying to build on? Is it cross-cultural leadership? Is it AI, digital literacy? Feel free to add that. Sorry, because time was of the essence, I forgot to say that. So please feel free as we are talking to add that into the chat. So what can we do? And these are just suggestions. And I would like to see what else you think that some of the actions that you're already taking that can help us as a collective, or some that you're thinking that we may have left out. Take our AI and ethics courses. What do you see nowadays what do you see nowadays advertised? Hey, get your AI certifications, go to Google, get Coursera, learn about Gemini, learn about all these different things. Very few, if any, speak about the ethics behind it. So can we be those that are trailblazers or that are learning and saying, I cannot acquire this the different AI digital literacy without actually asking those questions of ethics and positionality and power. What does that look like? Trust me, if you start speaking this way, you're probably going to be the only one in the room in tandem with others that are asking those very important questions. Volunteer for a data project. How many times do we say, oh, budgeting is not my strength, or those tech people, they start speaking. But what if you could say that my organization is doing this, and I think that we need to work cross-sectorally. I am going to volunteer to be part of this data project. And I'm bringing in my technical expertise and my learning hat as well. Another thing would be, why don't you join a cross-sector network? Whether or not right now you are at the point where you're looking for your next position, there are aspects where you could actually volunteer. For example, in Kenya, where I am right now, I'm working with grassroots level activists and survivors who are working to eliminate female genital mutilation. But they're doing it from the perspective from the community, using simple things such as non-digital phones to get the early warning out, because unfortunately, the cutting season usually works during education breaks or during when the students are out of school. So you see education, community working together and working with health professionals as well. Practice translation skills, whether or not it's saying in your field, if you're part of the distribution in a community refugee camp, how can you translate what you do into a team that is working on putting together a tool that will help make some of those areas safer and fluid? How do you translate that to non-technical people? So translation skills, and it could also include the languages that you speak as well. But in this case, we're also talking about how do you put technical into human, into something that's concerted that helps the community. Yep. And then the non-linear career path. We, as Maureen said, we are non-traditional. I have come from different backgrounds, whether or not it's education, higher ed. So how do you look at your own careers and say, I am going to, this is how I translate policy based on the work that I know. I've had hands-on experience. Now I want to work on translating that into policy. What does research look like to you? If you're looking at qualitative and quantitative, do you find that you work in spaces where quantitative is heavier? And then how do you advocate for a strategy building that is inclusive of all those different aspects of research and data collection? And then how do you morph into these private and public spaces, nonprofit into government? If you're sitting down talking, and one big player that is not talked about often right now is a corporate and private sector. They are also trying to fill those different gaps. But can you say that, okay, I work for Save the Children, and now there's an aspect of government that is, whether or not it's in the UK, whether or not it's in Addis Ababa, that is looking to translate what it is we've done, but now on a public facing as well. And then innovation and oversight. How can you make sure that you are that person sitting in that room, asking those questions and sort of shifting that status quo and saying that if we've not learned anything as we should, based on what happened in 2025 and continuing to happen, how do we innovate and work creatively in those spaces? And then Maureen, I think you have that. And then
No, this
if
is
you
the
can
last
also,
piece.
yeah,
Thank you so
perfect.
much, Catherine, for this. So, what are some key takeaways from our discussion here? Well, AI is a tool, is not a replacement. I think we all can agree on that, right? And ethics is a career advantage. Never lose your ethical um, lenses on how we approach this field. It's extremely important. Stay grounded, right? Um, Grounded in terms of understanding where your position is, right? And your position of power vis-a-vis others. Um, Stay curious. Goes back to the previous slide. How can you learn? What are the five action steps that you can take? Curiosity is extremely important. Stay connected, right? And most importantly, I won't say most importantly, one of many other important components is being a hybrid thinker, right? Work cross-sectorally, work cross-departmentally. Make sure that you are not operating in a silo. So this is the end. We do want to thank you all. We want to stay connected with you. Happy to share ideas, collaborate, connect. And yeah, thank you so, so much.
And
Thank you,
Maureen, if you
Maureen.
if you if you allow, could I please just read some suggestions as well?
Sure.
In the chat, somebody wrote action suggestions, and thank you for that. Play around with AI yourself. Imagine it within your own research, or actually put it into use. What questions arise? What concerns? What benefits? Play around with it, and playing around with it has given me the most insights. Remember what Maureen said: stay curious, be a hybrid thinker. That is excellent. And then somebody said, these are fantastic. Thank you. Also get on mailing lists for Alliance for Peace Building, SFCG, Proc Institute, etc., as they have regular webinars and conversations happening that explore use of AI in peace building, including real life examples and real time learning. And last but not least, somebody has said ICRC, FCRC, and generally the Red Cross movement always has career webinars for entry level professionals. Impact Pool also as well. Some focus on female professionals. So if you can see that we are learning together, we are not experts, be and all. So please feel free to continue sharing some of these resources, but just a kind gratitude for creating space for us. And as
Mhm.
Maureen has said, thank you. And I'm not sure if we have space for questions.
I,
Over
I,
to you,
I, I,
David.
I'm going to reserve the last question for me, or the last thing I would want some thoughts on, and that's self-care, right? And I
Hmm.
think you did talk about this burnout with all of this going on, and I'm really interested in how the two of you practice self-care when it comes to this tremendous onslaught of these changes going on.
Sure, I could start then, and I'll be brief. We'll be brief on this question. Self-care. I try to remind myself that in as much as we do take some of these heaviness home, you have to find time to separate. Okay.
Mhm.
Always remember that find the things that you love to do, be it gardening, if it's a vacation with a partner or a spouse, if you're a family person, you have children that centers you, they don't care what you do at work. And that is a very healthy balance. And reading things that have nothing to do with the work that you're doing. I
Mhm.
think it's helpful just so that you maintain some level of sanity and you recharge, when you come back.
And you're maybe
Thank
putting
you.
this down once in a while.
Oh, thank you. Absolutely.
Oh, unplugging is the biggest is the biggest challenge, but the biggest benefit. I learned to do that, and then half the time I'm like, oh my goodness, I need where my phone is. So I'm going to answer this very briefly. Where sometimes the question is the caregivers, who takes care of the caregivers, right? So most of us are in this field because we care and we give and give and give. And sometimes, as Maureen has said, it's okay in order for us to be able to pour from a full cup, because you can't pour from an empty cup, we have to leave and recharge ourselves. And sometimes that is um, easier said than done. But if it's something that we are collectively doing, it ends up being a collective care. For example, the person who checks on me is actually Maureen. She'll check and say proof of life. That's what she always says POL. So I'm always like, I'm breathing. She says breathing is not enough. Get up and walk. Go and do something. So having an accountability partner, especially in this field that is really emerging and changing, when some of the things within the Maslow's hierarchy, we are worried about where will our next meal come from, those of us who are looking for positions. But how do we operate in a way where we put on the mask first before we help somebody else? So self-care for me is an ongoing practice. It's not something that I have mastered, but I put it as part of mastering and switching off things, for example, that I need to do. That's an
Well,
excellent
thank you
question.
both. Thank you both.